Hola, buenos días a todos y a todas. Antes que nada, quiero...
Before we get started, I'd like to thank the presence of all of you. Thank you for having accepted our invitation. Some of you, as Diana was saying in our previous private conversation, are old friends to us. You are members of BIENALSUR. Others, as is the case of Maristella, are starting their contact with BIENALSUR based on this meeting, but as I stated in a private conversation before, we are confident that you will keep joining us in other chapters. I'd like to thank Diana and the entire BIENALSUR team, UNTREF Media and UNTREF staff members who are making this possible. Señas en Acción, the sign language interpreters who, from the very beginning of these meetings, this being the fifth, have allowed us to open up to the possibility of offering these sessions for people with hearing disabilities, with hearing disorders. Then we are very much able to have other people join us. They can enjoy, they can then grasp what BIENALSUR does. I believe that this is another innovation that BIENALSUR brought about to the world of art and culture in Argentina, and will keep going with these experiences. They have a lot to do with what we say, democratizing culture and bringing culture up to other environments. We tried a couple of different topics in the 4 previous discussions, and I'd like to take advantage of the fact that an ebook that transcribes the first few talks, the first 3 ones, will be posted on the web, so you can all download it, and during the week will be promoting this book and will be explaining how to download it the best way possible. This is another contribution in times of pandemic that BIENALSUR is offering so that we can keep being connected and so that we don't interrupt our efforts. I say we don't want to interrupt our efforts because I'll repeat myself on a comment I made in previous sessions. When the whole thing started, we wondered what to do in connection to BIENALSUR, whether to interrupt the meetings that we were having around Sur Global, Global South events with the presence of political scientists, artists, and philosophers from very many places around the world. These meetings were characterized by having massive turnout of people, both physically and also via streaming. And then we decided that when in doubt as to whether interrupting BIENALSUR for a while or not, then we decided that amidst this pandemic, amidst the inequality that this pandemic is showing, amidst the look down on some communities around the world, which this pandemic is also showing more intensely, we decided that our effort was necessary so far, and it became ever more necessary. So we decided to replace the Sur Global meetings by the BIENALSUR meetings that help us, as the screen shows, bring together friends from various places from around the world to discuss truly essential topics. Why do I say essential topics to be discussed? Because today we will be discussing about art on the territory, a BIENALSUR distinguishing feature, and one of the purposes and targets behind BIENALSUR is to put to the good use art and culture in order to build citizenship, in order to bring our art to very different places where otherwise it wouldn't have been possible. So we would have as many people participate as possible in BIENALSUR actions. In my mind, the thrill that you can feel when you stand in front of a piece of art in a museum or in a room where pieces are exhibited around the world, you very much feel it when you are working in a place as may have been in Ejército de los Andes neighborhood or on the border between Colombia and Venezuela, working with a very massive turnout of people, feeling that what we are carrying forward has very much to do with what I was saying before, building citizenship and putting art and culture to the very good use to create, as is the case in Cucuta, as will be explained by Alex Brahim, to turn BIENALSUR into an instrument to reconcile on borders between the Venezuelans and Colombians, or to empower families in the Ejército de los Andes neighborhood. For those of you who don't know it, one of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in Argentina, or Shantytown 2124, another highly vulnerable area in the country, to empower those families that saw that their children, with one of the major photographers from around the world who was called in by BIENALSUR for that project, as was the case, and Jan repeated that later, 1 year later, in another neighborhood that was very vulnerable indeed, in the city of Buenos Aires, to empower those families that saw how the photos taken by those children, by their children after a 3-month course, children from very neglected and cast out families, were shown on the best place of Buenos Aires, in the San Martin Square, around San Martin's monument, and every ambassador from abroad that had to pay homage and tribute to our freedom fighter, San Martin, as part of the diplomatic protocol in Argentina, had to take a look at those pictures. And they said that meant for them empowering. It didn't move us deeply only, but it also changed the livelihoods of those children. That was in 2017. Those who turned 18 years old already were able to join Bienal as photographers. And that truly meant for their family a big empowering effort and a lot of pride and a way to change their livelihoods. So this is the type of art and culture that we are devoted to making. And this is why all the experiences we'll be discussing about today, this has to do with art in the territory, are truly fundamental for us. These sometimes may look a little bit overarching as an objective, but when we say that Bienal Sur is headed for or tries to be part of the trail to build a new contemporary humanism. So I just would like to thank you again for helping us and take part in this roundtable or in this panel discussion, to extend greetings to the numerous people that are joining us via streaming, and ask Diana to conduct and to host this discussion. Good morning. Thank you all. I'll be very brief. I just want to give a space to your interventions. The discussion today will pivot around one of the premises we've been working so far, the idea of art on the territory, situating art, so to speak, turning every space a center wherever it is located, carrying out what we called site-specific art in contemporary art. A condition of this doesn't have to do with the relation between the artist, the space, and the production that they create, but also together with community. Communities should be included. On the other hand, we always say Bienal Sur goes to every place, as Derrida would have said, with the humbleness of the foreigner. This is where we place ourselves, and we work in a dialogue format because we are situated and in a dialogue. This is why we appreciate and we choose this format, which is highly unstable, I should say, because the dialogue is constructed with your own voice and with the voice of the other. And in this contraposition of voices we want to embark on for the next 2 hours. And without any further ado, I'll just give the floor to Maristela, with whom we were very interested in making progress on something that is very specific and very powerful. Art crossed itself with life in a very fruitful manner in the north of Argentina. Maristela, you may take the floor. Good morning or good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for having me, for inviting me to BIENALSUR. I'm thrilled to be able to present and share this experience of Iris and Pacha with all of you. This is only beginning, in my own opinion, even though it has some years background behind it. In the few minutes I've been assigned, I'd like to show you some images while I do my talking. Can you see the images? This is Iris and Pacha. This is an initial experience that got started by the Irosen team, commanded by the Argentine artist Tomás Saraceno. He's been flying with balloons for over years, showing that it would be possible to fly without fossil fuels and without emitting CO2. In 2015, Tomás, in the COP framework that was held in Paris, submitted his proposal, his community of Irosen, crossing art, science, and technology. In 2017, he landed in Las Salinas Grandes territory in Jujuy, and he came across the native communities with whom he interacted, so that in January 2020, a very short while ago, before the pandemic got started, a big event was conducted where a balloon was set free. They were actually several of them, but one balloon was set free without helium, without fossil fuel. This was piloted by a woman. She was carrying with her a message from the native communities. You can see it there. Water and life are more valuable than lithium. Uh, in the first few minutes I've been assigned to get started with my conversation, I'd like to talk about two ideas. The project, Iris and Pacha, I joined in January as a result of Saraceno's inviting me, began being a project aimed at taking care of the globe under a general key, and it landed on the territory and opened up to this confluence with native communities who are fighting against lithium exploitation since 2010. As you know, Argentina is part of the triangle of lithium together with Bolivia and Chile, as it is considered lithium is the starting point to go to a post-fossil mining. It is different from other types of minings, but it of course takes up millions of liters of water in the framework of an ecosystem such as Las Salinas Grandes that is very fragile and very arid. And so it's not just endangering the ecosystem and the wildlife of that desert and the communities around. We had this El Doradista fever unleashed around lithium companies land on those places as if they were empty spaces, and they don't pay any attention to the rights of those people. And their message is quite confusing, I should say, in connection to lithium. And as a matter of fact, it is far more complex than what they actually show the case to be. Tomás landed on a territory where the most vigorous struggles are being fought to defend territories and against lithium. All 333 communities showed a demand of protection to the Supreme Court of Justice in Argentina in 2010, which got revoked in 2013. And so communities went to the Inter-American Court, addressed the Inter-American Court in order to request to be asked, as is demanded by Agreement 179 by ILO. The lack of respect was so big on these communities, that communities today believe that this is a territory that should be free of any type of exploitation. They don't want to be asked. They just don't want to let any company come in or settle on their territories. Tomás made this problem visible, a problem with which we don't know much, or of which we don't know much. There are investigators in Argentina that are carrying out their own efforts on their side, but there is no installed discussion on the role of lithium in the post-fossil society and the type of energy transition that we should be taking a stake on, whether it should be a corporate transnational stake that won't be respecting the right of populations and that will be destroying populations, or we aim at a different type of transition that involves the discussion of the risks that are involved with this type of exploitation that will include populations and their participation. Along those lines, well, you just can see the messages of the population. Tomás gave up a space to them so they would write down their own messages, the messages they wanted to communicate. There were a number of ceremonies where they asked for permission to Mother Earth to carry out this type of activities. These are the ponds in one of the salt fields where lithium is exploited. And these are a number of demonstrations that have been conducted since 2010 on. Communities stood up against companies and they question and challenge the type of extraction, and they call upon discussing this issue seriously. The second point I'd like to go to with this image in the background is that from my own standpoint, Iris and Pacha experience is quite illustrative of art as a portal, a gateway opening up to new horizons to coexist. I know that this is nothing new. It is quite tried, I should say, in connection to how art is conceived, but I do believe it acquires new relevance in this context of a standstill where emancipatory languages are blocked or political emancipation. This day and age, as Jameson summarized when the Berlin Wall fell down, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Art has shown a lot of sensitivity, putting on stage the social and ecologic crisis, especially considering Anthropocene. They have promoted a very, very enriching dialogue without it being totally political. I believe that that is truly important because we are at a time where social sciences and human sciences clog or stop the flow of a vision, what their critical nature should be, their cynicism or skepticism. They stop us from thinking about the possibility of different worlds. In the field of progressive trends, there is a systematic blockade to the discussions that relate to this type of social and ecologic problems, and from territories where they consider that capitalism is doing away with the new ways of extractivism. They cannot see other alternatives. They are illiterate from an environmental point of view. That's quite serious. Art, on the contrary, triggers other possibilities or other languages. And I believe that it then challenges social sciences and human sciences in order to establish this connection with such nodal problems. This is what I'll be closing my intervention. Iris and Pacha, Tomás Saraceno, well, he also had a documentary that got featured on Encuentro channel. It's a 4-chapter series. It talks about how different communities will come to this common point: the Airoceno community that aims at taking care of the planet, the community of native people that opposed to territories being devastated. And here we also had the community of BTS fans. They are a group who promoted the conduct of this very special event. There is another perspective, the feminist one. I'd like to talk about this later on so we can engage in discussion. And this is the fact that, as a matter of fact, this balloon was piloted by a woman, the only Argentine balloon pilot for the time being. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Maristela.
Thank you, Maristela. And on thinking about this dimension, these places of art and what art can trigger and perceive on this path that is related to environmentalism and to problems with space, I'd like to invite Christian Boltanski so he talks about his experience in Patagonia, a very deserted space where he couldn't find native people in the area because of our history. But well, Christian's project is strongly related to environmental issues and to a subtle policy that once again shows us these possible places for art. Christian, it's my pleasure to give you the floor. Good morning. I don't want to be political or sound political at all. I'm not an ecological fighter, though I am in favor of ecology. My field is philosophy, philosophy connected to current dated events. In connection to BIENALSUR, I'd like to say that it is the precursor of something that will be very important. Suppressing the transportation of pieces of art, for instance.
Et quand j'ai exposé il y a quelques années à Buenos Aires, à la Maison des Migrants,
when I exhibited my own pieces in Buenos Aires a long time ago, a few years ago, everything was done on site. So today, what I do is some sort of music score in a way. Other people may interpret my own music score. What is important today is to build around the notion of an object, to find the notion of knowledge. For the last 15 years, we've been carrying out a number of exhibitions.
Décrivait une œuvre dans des petits textes que ce petit
The artist would describe the piece with very short texts. These descriptions were sent around the world and everyone could follow suit. This was featured in special art places. This is very important. In the Christian Western world, there is no longer this idea of communicating through objects. If you see a Van Gogh piece, then technology can replicate a similar Van Gogh. There's millions of copies, but it is actually not possible to see the original one because you have to go to Amsterdam to see the picture for a few seconds, and then you come close to his health. And transmission is not based on the object, but through knowledge.
Et je crois que ce qu'a fait la BIENALSUR, parce que
this is quite an old concept, but it is very new at the same time. Much of what was presented in BIENALSUR was created in Argentina for the Bienal itself. This is something that was quite original. It is important to imagine socially how to be able to reach out to many people so as not to waste energy or so as not to put energy to bad use, meaning transporting a sculpture from one piece of the world to another place in the world. What matters is to know that the piece by the artist does not just remain on the object, but it's all about the effort behind and the communication the artist intends to make behind the piece. So the big biennales, where everyone sends pictures and pieces from all over the world, we have to come to terms with the fact that maybe we should consider it the other way around. If we consider Patagonia, for instance, and this was thanks to the University of Buenos Aires that put together a system, and then you can listen to the language of whales. What I mean to say by this is that after having asked questions to human beings on the purpose of life, never have I come across such a thing. The last resource, the last hope is to get the answer from whales. So I did something like this without a tomorrow, and I'd also like to do it in the north of Argentina. There is no notion of object.
Peut-être simplement que dans cette région
Maybe
d'Argentine,
this will be done in 30 years' time. In that region of Argentina, they told me that people would talk to nature, and it's a matter of biology. And also oral communication plays a role here as well. Someone in Patagonia, Bahia Bustamante, tried to speak to the whales. And the story will remain. It will become some sort of mythology in the region. So, to me, today, what Biennale enables is to find a new way to exhibit, a far immaterial way of exhibiting. We always can keep producing pieces. My most important piece was featured at Le Grand Palais in Paris, and it traveled a lot. It was in Milan, in New York, in Japan, and Shanghai. And there was no transportation involved. I redid the piece every time with a twist of it. That was part of a symphony, and of course, it depended on the conductor, myself. So reinterpreting the piece and is what matters. A few years ago, I featured a piece in an important museum in Belgium. I got money paid, but I didn't get the money actually. I put it back onto the piece. There was no material transaction, so to speak. Every time the piece will be reconstructed, every time the piece will be seen different, and the label on the museums will be different. So it's beyond material. So with this epidemics, ecology becomes more important, and it is far more difficult to travel, but we can have narratives on exhibitions that are just there. Maybe in a given place in Buenos Aires, something can be built along these lines. I don't need to go or send over something. I just have to give you my narrative so as to be present orally. A few years ago, we made an exhibition. We could create our own pieces, but artists weren't given the possibility of seeing what was there. Here it is different. You may have imagined something like that on the South. That was because it was geographically isolated, but also because of this desire to work with many people who won't necessarily be present in Buenos Aires. This is what I wanted to say. If you have questions, then I'll remain available to you.
Una ronda de presentaciones breves y luego
We'll have a first round of brief presentations. Back to each of the speakers to ask questions. It's really very interesting to listen to these notions. It's my pleasure to contrast your narratives with the choreography by the sign language translator. Each discourse, each narrative has a different choreography, and that's just wonderful. When Christian was talking about the piece of work as a score, well, the gestures that are associated to that issue, or when Maristela was talking about women or the woman on the balloon, the first pilot on the Aerosene balloon, the choreography was really very wonderful indeed. And in this environment of dialogue, I'll ask Florencia Batiti to talk about another experience that is situated on a task that was started a few years ago when Memory Park, Parque de la Memoria, got started, the place where we know we'll find memory, the memory of a past that is not that recent any longer, luckily so, but which had a very strong effort. And art, once again, showed what places it can take up. Thank you, Diana. Good morning, good afternoon to you all. I was listening to Maristela and to Christian, and in a way, I could say that this project, Memory Park, Park of Memory, was born 20 years after the military coup, the coup d'etat, and the social demand was roaring for a place. Talking about art on the territory or problems, issues, and situated histories, what you listen to the most in, and then if you go back into your memories, and of course you can browse at the web page of the park, people who promoted this project towards the end of the 1990s were, or was actually, a need, the need of a minority in the society, a minority that was being pretty much listened to. They were claiming for a place, a site to remember the victims of state terrorism in Argentina. We should remember that at the point we had the so-called forgiveness laws in place. So meaning there was no justice. So it is in that context that we started thinking and we started creating the need for a space, for a place. Art is also part of a language that would enable critical reflection in connection to memory. But the first thing that we listened to in those testimonies was precisely that, the need to have a place where to go and take a look at names. Place and names, this is what comes first. This is the first claim, the first need. And thinking where, well, River Plate appears as the first option, some sort of symbolic guarantee, a referent, where to start thinking, where to start imagining a place to pay tribute to those that went missing during the last military dictatorship. And I was listening to Maristela and I said, art appears, but maybe not in such an obvious manner. Art, contemporary art, would accompany a project paying tribute to the memories of those who went missing because of the dictatorship. As you were saying, Diana, this is second nature to us today, but Parque de la Memoria was the first place to articulate memory and culture. in our country. Now we are having others, but at the point it didn't look that evident. There's been voices that challenged it in a way, and in a way they felt insecure as to whether art could be proof of such complex issues, such as people going missing or political violence or dictatorship. And along the process, it took long years. I mean, the park has been in existence for several years, and it's a project where you feel that you can keep going. It hasn't been materialized for good at all. I mean, it will keep changing, but it consolidated somehow. It was some sort of initial intuition by the first organizers, the organizations of human rights. This was the result of their initiative, especially women. They've always been women that promoted this. They have always been the majority. But this intuition became consolidated, meaning that contemporary art could be an effective tool to imagine a different society in order to digest the social trauma that was left behind by political violence during the military dictatorship. This is how the project was created. It was born as a result of the need for a place of memory to pay tribute to those people. It's the only place to bear all the names of those that were arrested and that went missing during the military dictatorship. It keeps being processed. It's a work in progress. We could call it an anti-monument because it is not emphatic. It is not something celebrating anything. It doesn't celebrate any heroic nature. It results from a different perspective or angle. And art has accompanied this project in two different scales, in two different records, so to speak. I like to think about it in this way. There is an external open space to the park where the monument can be found. It's at the core, at the backbone, where you can see the river, the landscape, and the names and the sculptures that are the result of an open contest that was opened up towards the end of the 1990s. And then we have the exhibition room. And there is where we have this curatorial program in space. We try for it to be quite open and pluralistic, approaching memory and human rights in critical keys, not just to talk about what happened in terms of state terrorism and memory, but rather to open up the dialogue and the views to other human rights. Human rights in Argentina, the majority of people tend to relate this in terms of state terrorism, and of course, rights are far more than this. Psychological issues come to play and environmental issues come to play as well, together with several many others. And this is what we attempt to from our temporary exhibitions that we organize and carry forward in the country room that has been present forever. So from the park, we've been working right from the onset, from the DNA of our institution. We have situated thought, which is so strongly present in our discourse, so to speak. That's the place from where it got started. It got started on that place, on the need to have a place dedicated and devoted to that. And with River Plate behind it, it gives us our identity as people living on the margins of River Plate. It gives us our symbolic identity. This is why that has been chosen as the place. And I cannot but mention that today we are remembering the 26th anniversary of the attack to AMIA in Argentina, to the Jewish Community Center. And part of the rubble resulting from the bombing were deposited nearby Park of Memory. And I couldn't but mention this. I say, if we talk about site and situated thought, this gesture today had to appear, at least so in our meeting. And I cannot but relate it to the piece as well. And based on those pieces of those rubble that were found, Marcelo Trotsky, an artist and a founding member of Memory Park, with those pieces, he created his own piece, taking a walk nearby Memory Park with one of the award winners of the contest, William Tucker, of course, having run the necessary permits, he generated a piece in connection to the attack. So I wanted to mention this because, I mean, the date we are getting together, and since I'm talking about the park and art on the territory, I also wanted to raise this issue. Thank you. Thank you, Flor. When you were talking about this, I just remembered when we took a tour, some sort of tour curated in Buenos Aires and the surrounding areas with Christian Boltanski in his first visit in 2011, when we started working with the Boltanski Buenos Aires project. And one of the first few places we visited was Park of Memory. And there, and in all places that we visited, that Christian thought in terms of projects or whether he would take an intervention or not, we asked ourselves questions that had to do with the point of departure of his visit. He asked, what was this before? What is underneath the surface? And I remember the dimension that this question got at Park of Memory, because whatever was underneath were the rubble of Amia, the debris from Amia. So the layers of memory that a site like that can hold are quite intensive. So we can keep working with situated projects and with very specific territories. Let's take a leap from River Plate and the Atlantic Ocean, and let's get to another place where memory, transit, migration, and in different dimensions, and in this current day and age, we can talk about what is going on at the Basque Country by a project carried out by Helga. Hello, good afternoon or good morning to all of you. Thank you, Diana, for giving me the floor. I will talk about what Vida Factoria is all about, but I'd like to first get situated on the geographical space we are. It has its own special feature. Historically, this was La Euskal Herria, 7 provinces. 3 of them are the Spanish Basque Country, other 3 are the French Basque Country, and the 7th one is La Mar community. Some historical events that may not be all that important today, but this got split, and then we are in Spain and France. But when it comes to this point, this is a transporter space, which is quite unique, and it acquires this very specific nature where we are on a border where in turn it's an intermediate point between the 2 Basque countries from one side and on the other. This is where we find stuff or things that make us different, but which also make us similar to one another. So this acquires a wealth and an interest with itself at all levels possible, social, anthropological, artistic, and cultural, and even political, that is quite enticing or seductive. There is a river that is called Virasoa River. Currently, so it is the natural border between the 2 sections. And Factoria is on the Irún city. It is the 2nd biggest city in the province on the side of the Spanish Basque Country on a transporter territory. And we are called this factory of transporter cultural creation. This is the name of origin that we acquired. Why is that so? Because it's a factory where workers are, workers of art and culture. We consider ourselves workers, and as such, this space, being a private space, is a not-for-profit association. And Aníbal Hossami, as he stated initially, we want to democratize culture, we want to get closer to citizens and participate with them. We want to take up the space that belongs to us, the public space, the territory that belongs to us. And this philosophy, in an untoward manner, led us into having a discussion with the territory. Why is that so? It wasn't a territory thought of as a geographical space or as a physical space, but rather as a space where people inhabit, animals, geography, orography. This is a place that is inhabited and manipulated or molded by those around them. So this is where we took an interest in starting to work with the territory. So without thinking, but walking down this trail, it is that we got more devoted to working along these lines. We started creating bonds of cooperation with citizens, with cultural agents. We created a trans-border network. We started working with projects where we bring people together, agents, institutions from both sides of the border. We started taking this trans-border nature into consideration, as well as the inhabitants and the cultural and artistic sector, providing scholarships to creation that will be promoting this dynamic movement. And this is how we got started, and we solidified our project with such a strong trans-border nature from the environment where we are living in. We are kind of at the core of this situation. So in this scenario, by way of example, and I'd like to be brief, I don't want to take any longer than what is assigned to me, but I just wanted to talk about the singular feature of the territory where we are. We speak 3 different languages all the time. We have different politics and policies, etc., etc. On the other hand, Vida Factoria, how does it come to be in continuous territory context and in continuous contact with the territory? And finally, I'd like to focus on 3 or 2 specific projects, depending on how long my intervention proves to be. I'll touch upon 2 or 3, and these exemplify what I've been talking about so far. So let me go to the point directly. The first project I wanted to talk about results from a cooperation network, a trans-border cooperation network that we founded with colleagues from the town next to us, crossing the border. It's called Nicatonea. It's a residence of artists on the French side. We've been working with these ladies for the last 10 years in different joint efforts. We decided to create a network, establish a network for trans-border cooperation. And what we do is to generate a number of different mechanisms so that we can facilitate language and cooperation between the 2 borders of the Basque country. An idea that was created 3 to 4 years ago was to publish an editorial artistic project. This invited a group of people, a group of artists, institutional agents, and officials from both sides of the border. And this group consisted of 14 people. they got together, and we keep meeting and getting together at different points in time in order to carry forward this editorial project. It is an piece as well, an artistic piece as well. We reflect upon a topic that is related to the border. That's kind of the guiding point. This is a proposal that then turns into editorial project. This is called Smuggler, KBK, for an acronym. 2 editions have been conducted so far. We'll have the 3rd one this year, but since this is quite a special year, we are not sure so far. And what we try and do here is to give an example of how we can work in a transborder manner, having different languages, policies, and cultures, and how we can carry forward a common project. Another project that has to do with the territory is the emotional cartography of Vida Soa. It's a project we received from the Irún side last year. So through an artistic and anthropological tandem, which in our case we carried out with our friend archaeologist Maria Jose Noan, is to carry forward an artistic project to reflect upon a number of topics that is connected with the historical memory. So our proposal is to carry out an emotional map. As a result of this proposal, I mean, we've been working on this for 1 year, and we submitted it on last May the 13th, and it led us into sharing, listening to the individual accounts of citizens, those that then construct the collective narratives in the territory. We work with the citizens in general, from 6-year-olders down to senior citizens. We meet in different ways, through surveys, through groups, through events on the public space, going deeper into their accounts, records, their preferences, and trying to give them a visual voice so that we can create a physical map. It has a very symbolic nature, and this was built through an anthropological effort we carried out with Jose Maria Nosemay, with citizens on both sides of the Virasol. And finally, another project. I mean, there are several, but I'll focus on these 3 because I don't want to take you that far or that long. Another very nice project that is proposed at an institutional level for the last 5 years, and we are the artistic directors in those years. We are thinking about the next date, getting together in September. The workshop will be called Rivera, and it won't, I mean, the idea is to give value to the river through artistic ideas. This is in order to recover the area and in order to reinforce the bond between citizens and the river. That got kind of lost. The river was the border, is the border between the 2 sides. So for quite too long on this area, you couldn't trespass, you couldn't cross on the other side with a vessel or a ship. So it was kind of a strip that it was no man's land. Now it is far more inhabited. Now with COVID, of course, it was closed for more than 3 months. That generated a lot of tension and fear among citizens, but now it is far more visited than a few months ago. So it's an idea of getting together. So it's this workshop of site-specific projects where we will be working as artists, but we will be coordinating other artistic proposals that are multidisciplinary in nature. And we make proposals that have to do with a topic that is related to the historical memory on this region. And on these workshops, we generate new narratives and new experiences that take us to the point of departure, the territory. And I'd like to conclude it here. I don't want to take longer than assigned. I just wanted to talk about these issues that are the ones that define and characterize our work with the territory here on the Basque Country. Thank you, Helga. And from this border, we unavoidably have to move on to another, which is the border where we have Alex Brahim as an activist and as a person who actively takes part. This is a border that, given the historical context and the flowing of borders in Europe, I mean, the border had its own limitations, but it became more fluid, but then it got complicated. It would be like the reverse situation between Helga and that by Alex. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I apologize because I shouldn't be using this device, but a construction work began next to my home today and unexpectedly. So thank you, Diana. Thank you, Annibal, for allowing me to share this moment with you, the border between Colombia and Venezuela. I'm highly identified with what Diana was saying, and as Elga was explaining initially, so the genealogy of the Basque country divided into two countries because of the turning of history. And I was thinking about the history of Colombia and Venezuela. We used to be the great Colombia, letting alone the ancestral territories of some communities, such as the Bari and the Wayu, who continue to exist today. For them, even before the arrival of the Spaniards, there was no territory division. This place I come from, even though I'm the son of immigrants from a Spanish mother and from Arab members on my father's side, is an inverted triangle, a vortex on the Caribbean Sea, at the Maracaibo Sea, and the Andes in Colombia on the eastern mountain range create this basin, the Zulia Basin, the Catatun Basin. On the end, we find Cúcuta, 10 minutes from San Antonio del Táchira. Cúcuta and San Cristobal have been historically brothers and sisters. Together with Maracaibo, have been the straight line of relation with the foreign world for long decades and for centuries, even at times where independence of these nations got created. From Cúcuta, we organized the Great Colombia. It was not just the Republican birth on these lands, but the consolidation of a dream between Simón Bolívar and Francisco de Paula Santander in a united Latin America, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Panama. And with the Cúcuta Congress celebrating its second centennial in 2021, and it will be the third edition of BIENALSUR and Juntos Aparte, an international meeting of art and creation, which of course brings us together on the way since the border got closed in 2015. And with this, I'll give some historical context, some specific context to our project and process. In 2015, the border between Colombia and Venezuela got closed, and a very painful act happened: the expulsion of Colombians that had been living in Venezuela for decades. We had been the country of development in South America. Colombia, for long decades, has had several problems. Venezuela was a pole of development, and lots of Colombian people were forced to finding a livelihood in Venezuela. In 2015, when the erosion or the distance in between the governments of the two countries were quite advanced, there was this final closure and sudden closure on the border after the expulsion of these Colombians. And my brother, Luis Miguel Brain, who rests in peace, and I myself, who run El Pilar Foundation, the organization I preside over in Cúcuta, that has been raised in honor of Pilar de Brahim, our mother, who was historically involved with the development of this land, talking about the logic of art and territory, I can say that there is a history that precedes me personally. And along these lines, with my brother, we considered it was important to show the fracture, the crack on this region. The region was a brother and sister. I mean, the history, the food history, the cultural history was the same, distant from Caracas, distant from Bogota because of topographical issues. And all of a sudden, finding a line, a division line, where it had traditionally been a point of confluence, as was represented by Simón Bolívar, was something that we just rejected beyond governance or beyond diplomatic decisions. We knew that the Venezuelan exodus would be too severe a reality, an irreversible situation that would transform forever the demography of the Americas, especially that of Colombia. We knew that it would be quite a hard time for the region, but would open it up to a window of opportunities because the world would turn their eyes to this. And the artistic community that had been fractured by borders would be the catalyst to bring about a number of wills that had to converge later on in order to project a different model, a different narrative from the civic point of view, from an intersectorial point of view, where art and culture are the elements for cohesion, for trust, and for dialogue. And what we have proven here is that that social potential of art, that capacity for citizens to get an opportunity to transform, to have participation scenarios, could take the temperature with a lot of an effort, with a risk stake on the first edition without any genealogy of an event of such nature, of such a scale, activated the center of the town in this circuit of exhibitions. And we had a number of programs, including an audiovisual cycle in the Cucuta neighborhoods, a pedagogical program with workshops and conferences opened up to artistic creators, mediation program with communities coming out to places and bringing communities to spaces where we develop our activities. And there are a number of intersections with other agents, artistic and cultural, civic and activists, academicians, creating a territorial mesh. So that experience is the one we have been developing since 2017. They were as crazy as we have been when we created BIENALSUR in Cucuta with Anibal Hossami in 2017. I mean, it was a dream. Now it is a horizon. And the awful times that the world is going through today, where we say that pandemic and confinement have caused us to understand what is to be together, even when we are apart. Today, this offers these means and this opportunity to establish discussion with the world, to resignify, to give new meaning to our place in the territory, and doing it under common cooperation, having multi-sectorial complicities. Today, this morning, we developed a civic activity on the Simón Bolívar International Bridge. Maybe it is not the right time to share those images. Yes, of course. I mean, if there are technical conditions that will allow you to, let's show it and I'll keep talking. I have to share my screen, right? Can you see? Yes, it's perfect. Today is the International Nelson Mandela Day. The school run by Ruby Marquez, which has an activity in Cucuta for empowering and juvenile leadership, is carrying out this civic action in 67 bridges in 67 cities around the world that are now called Mandela Bridges. These are civil organizations, the Victims Secretariat in the north of Santander, our region, and Cucuta, our town, the Fronteras Secretariat in the north of Santander, the main newspaper foundations such as Let's Talk About It or the Right to Be Disobedient, the Academy in the north of Santander, and we ourselves, Juntos Aparte and Pilar Foundation, embarked on this adventure of representing this symbolic act where the border is closed, not just because of diplomatic reasons, but because of the pandemic. And thanks to the leadership role of our allies, it was possible for us not just to work, as has always been the case, on Colombian migration on the Simón Bolívar International Bridge, but that Venezuelan authorities were in this place to show from the historical consciousness that has brought Colombia and Venezuela together, they decided that for a time, for a moment, it was possible to open up the bridge, to open up the bridges. That was the name given to the project developed by Brodsky, Marcelo Brodsky, who was called upon carrying out a site-specific project. And here what we see is this documentation. This is unedited material. It is being edited so that we show it at the summit on the global meeting carried out by Ubuntu based on this experience with a number of people that have been awarded by the Nobel Peace Award. And this is the master footage of what had been done in the morning. Venezuelan authorities came close and they decided that we were able to carry out the act between the two countries and that they themselves would take an active leadership role of this symbolic act. And I wanted to share this because it is very relevant and it's an excellent coincidence. I mean, the fact that the day I got invited to take part of this dialogue, this is happening nearby where I am. This was invited by Ubuntu to their leaders on the region so that they would activate this action. And we can see how at a point in time where against all odds, we don't expect to have the possibility of opening up the Simón Bolívar International Bridge, except for the specific transportation of some people that are going in one or another direction. This happens not very often. And before I conclude, I should say that the bridge that is closed today has always been an open up place 24/7 with a high flow of cars, bicycles, motorcycles, and pedestrians. And this dynamic was not seen before. There were no restrictions before. There were no limits or dividing points. This has always been the point of convergence, exact convergence between the two regions. And well, the north of Santander in Colombia and El Táchira in Venezuela. And with this, we will be closing this and I'll be closing my presentation. I thank you once again for inviting me and also those that are joining us in our discussion. So you know this project, Juntos Aparte, this international meeting of art and culture and borders, puntosaparte.com and puntosaparte.cucuta. I hope it wasn't uncomfortable on your part for me to invite people to take more knowledge of who we are, the project, the history behind this region where drug trafficking, smuggling, conflict between Colombia and all their players continue to be a problem today, where social mesh is not deteriorated, but it also claims, and this becomes a reasonable critical mass. It aims for transformation and change of direction. And it's been our honor to have participated in this agency of transformation from the perspective of art and culture. And as I was saying before, we get together with a number of players that are doing the same from other ends on the territory. Thank you, Alex. I was listening to you and I was taking a look at those images and I was thinking about the symbolic disobedience, inviting to other players to take action. and to take part in actions that would be otherwise unimaginable. That image of the police, the migrations, or border control police taking part in this project that brings together other bridges. And I truly believe, well, taking the point of departure, sorry, Diana, it's important to say that this is a project of the International School of Ubuntu Leaders. They invited different schools around the world, one being in Cucuta, to join up this effort. And as I was saying, we've been working in this mesh, this logic of relations. And what we have done was to come to those players who are committed territorially, so we would take action and give it a different dimension. And this is the result. That's great. And along the lines of the capacity art has to give visibility to other situations and these disobediences that end up enabling people to see things that cannot be possible otherwise, installing realities in a different way. Well, we are also close to borders that sometimes are not even physical, sometimes they are just social borders. And artistic actions will also help us go beyond those bridges in order to keep having the image, the mental image on top of our mind. So I'd like to now invite Jan Lorvo, so he talks about the bridges he has from his own role. On the one hand, he is the cultural advisor, but his work is specially situated. This is why we were interested in having his voice here. Thank you, Diana. Thank you for inviting the French Institute in Argentina and the French Embassy to this meeting, thinking about possible futures, part of the territory are two challenges. Why is that so? Because territory is not just a distance problem. Another territory might be close. It might be that on one territory there are several other territories. And as you were saying, there are territories that have to do with economic things. There are political territories. Today, there are confined territories, traditional confined psychological ones. And I really we like to build, we as human beings like to build borders and walls. That's one problem. That's one problem. Every territory tells histories or tells stories. History, the one that Christian Boltanski talked about, mythology and narratives. Every piece of territory tells lots of stories. Our witness will be the one in the neighborhood, Padre Carlos Mujica. It's the Shantytown 31. And our story is called Love for the Neighborhood. It is a public-private cooperation effort. This is what I do in Argentina. I work in cooperation. And we think that through cooperation, we can build lots of things. This was done between the French embassy, a private company between the Buenos Aires and Paris cities, in order to favor social integration, urban and cultural integration through the implementation of a cultural ecosystem around the creation of a professional and technical training site. The purpose is to create a center to train people in Carlos Mujica neighborhood in connection to the main activity of a French company that is in charge of collecting waste and garbage. And the difficulty the company had was to install itself in a vulnerable community. There was some rejection. I mean, coming into a neighborhood such as this is not easy. There is a code behind, there is tradition behind, and there are other types of government rules that cannot be readily seen, not immediately. So of our effort meant establishing a diagnosis. I really liked to see what happened at the Basque country because the methodology we followed was quite similar. We did so with the Parisian Scenography Agency, NEO, and the City of Paris in order to establish a diagnosis of this situation and carry out a sensitive map of uses based on the needs on the territory. We wanted to cooperate with those people who lived in the neighborhood to see what they might need or whatever was missing. That is, to make ourselves available to neighbors rather than the other way around, rather than imposing an international cooperation idea. We didn't want to be there for 3 months to be gone for good. From the beginning, our idea was, let's live together for several years because we will all be building this together. So we worked with another social organization that is called the Group SOS in France that helped us think about the architecture in this site and the cultural programming and the training that had to be together. Working with all the players in the neighborhood was not something to be taken lightly, because then you say, well, we have to work with the city of Buenos Aires. There is a service, a department that is in charge of vulnerable communities. But as I was saying before, there are other organizations that have a lot of power as well, church, associations, and whatnot. In a way, the solution is not simple or monolithic, but on the contrary, we have to think about a multi-type of script. That was the main challenge, that of beginning and listening to everyone and listening and building together with everyone, knowing that many times there were diverging postures or stances. This is why through culture, we had a result that was far beyond, that went far beyond we had thought. We had this workshop on photography coordinated with the Frank-Irani photographer from the National Geographic. I met him thanks to UNTREF, Diana and Danibal. And this meeting with this photographer allowed us to propose ARESA to train 4 Argentinian photographers so they could teach photography to a group of 30 young people from 13 to 18. And these 4 trainers gave a 5-month course in 2009, photography courses under the coordination of this main photographer. You can't imagine how it is like to teach for 5 months a group of 30 kids who live in this neighborhood. 5 months is an entire life for us. They started with an activity and they were willing to give up on it, not because of lack of motivation, but because of the reality of their lives. They had to go and work. They may have had their own difficulties at home. So that was the first challenge, to be able to live through this and to have something to tell after it was over. This was done in the 31st in Shantytown 31. Young people were given semi-professional cameras and we followed up on them. The purpose, the most important thing, is for them to have taken pictures of the places where they live based on their own perspective. So there was no images seen from the foreigner's view, but by themselves. They would have the cameras and they would take the shots, the snapshots, by taking a walk on the neighborhood, at a family nap, at school, in activities. This gave us an exceptional look on what this neighborhood meant for them. And the result of this was shown on the French embassy territory with the ambassador at the time, to invite all families from the 31st from Shantytown 31, we opened up a reception as we would do on a weekly basis for the diplomatic representatives in the country or authorities or our partners. And that night, all these families for the first time crossed the avenue because Shantytown 31 is 600 meters away from the France embassy, but it's a different territory. It's like a different country. And they all got invited to a cocktail that got prepared as we normally do, this type of celebrations to receive ministers and authorities. And we highlighted the work of these kids in front of their parents. And something extraordinary happened on the weeks that followed. Parents would come along with other friends down to the embassy to show the exhibition. There was some sort of restoration, a narcissistic restoration. There was respect and the value that they had. They were capable of doing something that was not illustrative, but an artistic production, thanks to the curatorship of this photographer. And after this initial stage, the second one was to show these pictures in the neighborhood itself in order to show that this could offer a mirror to something that was done on this neighborhood to be then shown to all those people living inside. That had a wonderful effect that we hadn't imagined. This project escaped our minds. Sometimes things prove to work, and then people take ownership of this. These young people took ownership of the project. And we, of course, were just mere companions. They were the ones to have written this history. I don't know whether this was the last stage, but another stage we're at. We are editing the book. It's a catalog. It's a catalog that we like to have on our bookcases. And this catalog allowed us to tell the entire story with images of these kids, with texts of students from the French Argentine school, and organizing another meeting of these young people, middle class kids who live in a very pleasant situation with those kids of this neighborhood. We had several meetings so that the kids from the neighborhoods could show their images and so that kids would write stories on these images. On the catalog, you have the images taken by kids of neighborhood 31, plus the texts written by the students in the French Argentine school. And that was not, of course, done overnight. It took a while. Young people got together and they established bonds of friendship. They like to spend time together, drink mate on a park, listening to music. That worked in a wonderful way, and that allowed us to create that. And of course, human beings and the catalog we generated showed the story. They are skilled, and at the same time, this experience we were able to show and have confidence on them. Sometimes they are in this relationship where there is violence because of a social reason, or sometimes people look down on these kids who are in the neighborhood, and of course they are looked down by those who live in Recoleta. So it's injecting some positivism, some respect, and highlighting the fact that they do have the skill sets in place. And we, as the French Institute in Argentina, whenever we have an event, we hire some of these kids for photographies. So there is a continuity. We sold some of the pictures of these young people to some collectors, to some associations, And it was a path that meant something else. It's getting together, and we will keep joining these young people. If you allow me for 2 more minutes, I'll talk about 3 other projects. By listening to what people in these neighborhoods wanted, we did it on a tailor-made manner. It's not that we are having this photography exhibition. We didn't have this idea of having this drama workshop coordinated by director Branco Canale, but we did actually do it with the grandmas from inside the neighborhood and from outside the neighborhood. They told us stories that are inspired on everyday matters, and we will be presenting this next year in Cervantes Theater. This is based on, for our colleagues who don't live in Argentina, it's the National Theater, the only national theater. It opens up a place outside from the neighborhood so that they can act in real, in a real theater together with the director and the entire team, with the idea that people can walk away from the neighborhood rather than drowning themselves in the neighborhood. There was an artistic workshop by Nicola Constantino, Argentine artist, edible ephemeral artist. There's lots of bakery houses in the neighborhood, and there's lots of birthday parties. And well, of course, there was a very high demand to have different cakes, so to speak, to do art on cakes. And another thing that resulted from this map of uses and traditions, we developed workshops on urban cultures, hip hop culture, with the cultural center in Recoleta. And that is really important. The kids in this neighborhood with the urban culture and the creativity on the territory were able to be respected, recognized, and we were able to open up an institutional space for them. That was the case for last year. On on July the 14th, these kids featured a show on urban culture in the framework of the National French celebration. So I'd like to say that I feel part of BIENALSUR. We all are. We have some BIENALSUR in our heart because BIENALSUR is a crossing. It is a meeting point. Gilles Deleuze would say, creating is to resist. Creating is to resist. So let's resist together. And when I say together, then I will now say together, even when we may be separated. Thanks, Alex Brahim. Thanks you and congratulations to all of you. I believe we are a family. We all are family members. Each and every one of us have their own social and professional responsibilities. And it's good to have a space such as BIENALSUR in order to express ourselves and get together. Creating is to resist. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Jan. Of course it is to resist. And beyond the nuisances in our positions, the nuances in our positions, we all speak from our own territory, and we are, of course, talking from our own bodies, and bodies talk about presence, absence, or latency. And I was thinking about the project Marcelo Dantas is carrying out in Sao Paulo, where a hospital got reinvented into a space of culture with the memory from those walls, from those places, and the interaction that will be part of the problem or of the challenges that will have to show how a city of Sao Paulo should behave based on this. Marcelo is privileged to have crossed the border today in the morning, something that is quite limited for all of us lately. It was quite an adventure to come to this point, I should say. But it's like after 4 months without traveling, well, It's an entirely new experience, I should say. It is one with a totally different experience and with total emptiness. But what happened in the last few months is that our lives got interrupted by some sort of wall, and we are now living inside the wall. We know that there was a past. The past stayed behind, and it won't be back with us. But at the same time, the only way to leave the wall is behind is to create something new. And it should be quite innovative. We need to have an opportunity because we all are quite permeable. The idea of infiltration, new ideas, new languages, it is quite acceptable. We are quite susceptible today to accepting change. That is quite interesting, and it has a very strong potentiality for art. Art can leave its paradigms behind. It can leave its own truths, its consolidated taboos, and at the same time, it can innovate and attempt other fields, other languages. A person like Christian Boltanski has been doing this for the last few decades. He's been trying. The physicality of art is not what really matters. I worked very many times with Christian. The most important thing in his work is history, the history that people tell to others about their own work. It has to do with memory. So can we take a look at things? Can we take a look at the model, the inspirational model of the virus as a model that can help us a lot to get to this other place? The virus may be some sort of password, so we come down to another place. The virus is a very thin code, a very small one, but it has an impressive capacity, not just to multiply itself, but to have an impact on the bodies it inhabits. And I see that as a unique opportunity. It's a one-of-a-time opportunity, maybe as the one we had after the war, and where we bring our standard down and we accept the new being. There is no longer such a high level of resistance. So public art will be a big platform for this moment. Art that will move on to public space where issues that have to do with isolation of people is not all that important, but democratic access are contained as well. And the idea that art has to be together with society as a whole, because we are all having a disease in a way, and we all need a hospital, so to speak, a conceptual hospital, so that we are aided to come to another place we can invent to exist or to inhabit. This is what matters. I mean, the place we have to go to doesn't exist, and we need to try to give it a try, to attempt something. And the opportunity that is happening today, territories between art and technology, which used to be a facultative, optional territory for some artists in order to continue, is no longer such thing, because the only reality we have is one based on technology. If we wouldn't have any technology, then our life in pandemic would be devastating. It is only possible to continue to create, and it is possible for us to continue to do things because we have powerful tools in our hands in order to get together and prepare this new space. So it's interesting to say, I'm talking about this, but at the same time, I'll be showing a project that got started in the past century under the past paradigms. And today we have the challenge to adjust this project to the new times that are coming about. I won't be showing what I'm thinking for the future because we still continue to inhabit behind the wall. We haven't left it behind yet, but I'll show you so you can understand part of my project. Let me show you part of it. The Matarazzo City. Is it projecting well? It's projecting perfectly well. Great then. Matarazzo City is a space. It's a piece of land. It's green. It's green areas. It's an old hospital in Paulista Life, is on the Fifth Avenue in Sao Paulo. It's an absurdly valuable site which was forgotten. It turned into oblivion because this hospital was abandoned. It didn't work anymore as a hospital. So with the intervention of very good architects, we created a way to build beneath the hospital, connecting from beneath, so that we would use an area without having any trees, without removing any trees. We had to keep up 10,000 trees to create all this. The space will have a cultural center, a hotel, an educational campus, lots of things that will work. I am responsible behind the hotel, and I am responsible on the House of Creativity. This is the central part, the building that connects the hotel, restaurants, stores, and whatnot. This is the size of the building, but it grows up down. This is the historical building. It's a 3-story building, but which will grow beneath where the theater will be created. So this is where we will have a space for exhibition of 1,900 square meters, a space for children, for reflection and thought. So it's interesting to see that it's on the basement. So we keep the historical building on the top of it and we create below it, beneath it. So these are the floors. This is the exhibition room that keeps up the story of the space. So walls are restored, but scars are remain visible. The wood on the ceiling will remain. The vegetation growing will keep on the space, so it will have all the halls, all the circulation halls that will be very lit. And it won't be a white cube. It will be a space that will keep up its memory and the history behind it. This is the theater on the underground of the space, and it is a reversible theater because it can hold 1,500 people standing and 800 people on chairs. Let me ask you something. We don't get to see the images. We don't. We just see the first. You're not.
Dios Padre, Dios Padre. Okay, dame un momento. ¿Por qué no me dices?
Just give me some time. Why didn't you tell me that before? Sorry.
Estoy viendo en
Well, I thought it was my own case. Let me see whether I can show you.
Stop share. Okay, exit. Déjame empezar una vez más.
Let me get started once again.
Okay. ¿Ahora lo ves?
Do you see?
Ahora vemos, sí. A ver, sí, ahora sí, sí. Gracias.
Yes, we do now. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. So let's enhance the size. Let's zoom in. Is it better now? Yes, much better. Great. So this is what I was saying before. It has to do with the square, the entire square, the park where Matarazzo City is. It's the green area with historical sites and buildings. The relevance of keeping these trees understanding the importance of keeping up the vegetation in the space and of keeping the historical building, having a tech campus, an educational part inside, and inside here, a farmer's market. Is it now being shown? Yes. And this is the part I will be focusing on, the Creativity Bradesco House. It is the central part of the space. This is the east building here. This building in the middle between the hotel and the part that has to do with restaurants and, well, educational part and whatnot.
Eso es el edificio, es un edificio histórico, como decía, que es en 2 pisos, con la parte de abajo construida.
These are
Que se hace, que se construye desde arriba por abajo.
The parts that are constructed from the top down. This is the exhibition room, and this is the inside view of the exhibition room that will remain with original materials with which it was historically constructed, but we will be opening up the technique. It will have personality, history, and scars will remain as well. It will stay alive. And the theater, the space that can be retrofitted to a multi-purpose space for projects, events, and a number of different things. And here the proposal to create on a weekly basis, different pieces of art will be featured there by different artists, but they will be created locally with materials that have been locally prepared in Brazil. Nothing will be transported. Ideas will be imported, but production will be local. So that is really key in the process to get inspired on creativity. The platform is highly multidisciplinary. It includes art, science, technology, design, music, and a number of different contents in the programming. It's a very intensive programming. And this is the structure, the building structure. The idea is to have inside the most central point in downtown to create a new town, so to speak, where we offer and where we provide information on culture and creativity, where we offer a space for very major creation. It'll have one traffic of 1 million people in the Paulista Live. This is like the key in Rio because it's the most visited avenue in Sao Paulo. And let me show you this short video.
Eso ahora ya está completamente lleno.
This is fully covered. This 35-meter hollow has fully been built now. This was last year. This is the chapel. And Ciudad Matarazzo is the entire area that you see here. Did you see that? Yes, it does show perfectly well.
Entonces, eso es un poco de lo que estamos.
So this is what we are putting together for 2022 in commemoration of 200 years of Brazil and 100 years of modern art in the city of Sao Paulo, and creating a new place where people can exchange in town. And this is it. It'll be a territory with a lot of international collaboration and cooperation, because it is an essentially international space with artists from around the world creating specific pieces for that place. Thank you, Marcello. We are kind of going back to what you were alluding to. We are on this wall in between us. We are amidst the process. We talked quite extensively in several of our meetings before, and something that I find quite interesting of this meeting is that we have come to specific projects, and the idea for us to be able to do this relates to, among other discussions that emerged, we had the issue of the fact that there's lots of things we wouldn't like to go back to, but many others, which for a reason, we'd like to highlight, rethink, good practices on which we want to keep walking. Many of the things that were presented here could be presented as part of good practices or good dynamics. And along those lines, by trying to perceive the latency of those on this virtual panel session, I took a look at Maristela. She was jotting down notes. So I'd like to invite her to open up her dialogue based on these cases that are so diverse and converging at the same time. That is, feeling situations and finding how change can be generated. It's quite interesting to listen to the diverse experiences. Well, your voice doesn't project very well. How about now? Is it better now? I was saying that it is true. These experiences are quite interesting. Some have to do with empowering rural places or vulnerable places. Others have to do with the need to lay down bridges or to create a better human being. And I'd like to make two comments on this. The first one relates to what was stated by Marcelo in the opening remarks of his presentation. I do agree with him on the fact that this crisis, no matter how awful it may be, it opens up with itself some sort of gateway. It's not that art in itself is a gateway. Big crises open up a threshold so we can pass through to other worlds. A degree of uncertainty is what we are having right now, but major crisis to open up paths to some cognitive liberation where we can discuss, where we can have major discussions in terms of what horizons are we willing to have for the future society. The fact that many people are saying that they don't want to go back to normal because going back to normal means to consolidate a model of inequality, accelerating ecological collapse, puts on stage the fact that we, as a matter of fact, are and can open up and discuss on what kind of society we want to live in. And then I go back to art. I go back to art as a gateway to these other worlds that we are focused on wanting to have, and the topical imagination that this is bringing, unlike other disciplines such as human sciences or social sciences that don't enable this, at least not so far, not today. The second comment has to do with what Christian Boltanski was saying on the philosophical dimension, because I believe that projects such as Iris and Pacha are deeply philosophical in nature. Even more so, the ecological narrative is deeply philosophical when this flows into with the narrative of native people or feminism, popular feminism especially, because these narratives give account of the crisis of modernity cultural paradigm, where the dualism between society and nature consolidated a productivistic, instrumental view of things and a view of nature where human beings conceive ourselves as someone independent or who can stand alone independently from nature. In view of this pandemic, we come to terms with the fact that we need to build a different type of society. We are independent human beings, and the language of original people and popular feminism, ecofeminisms, or feminist economists come to say that we have to be careful. We need to be interdependent, and we need to give importance to interdisciplinarity so that life will thrive around these discussions. So ecological narrative becomes deeply philosophical because it comes hand in hand with a relational paradigm that challenges modernity that is so much at a crisis today. And even though we don't talk much about the social or environmental causes of this pandemic, they are rendered visible by the pandemic in and of itself. This is where I'll leave my conclusions because I'd like to keep listening to what others have to say and to keep discussing. I see Florencia nodding. Maybe she wants to make a remark, or maybe Christian. I'm not sure whether Christian would like to complete anything in terms of Maristella's comment. I'd like to make a remark here. It's interesting and very relevant in connection to what Maristella was saying and to what Marcelo was saying. Inside the system of art, where we are quite used to having exhibitions and events and whatnot that denounce environmental issues, we have to focus, and maybe this could be a very good opportunity, that is the pandemic as a gateway of opportunity, of how our system works, what the production conditions in our system are. Because otherwise, we as cultural operators or as cultural brokers or agents, we are kind of imposters. I mean, we denounce the environmental disasters, then transporting pieces of art from one place to another and then helping create contamination and footprints. So that is counter-sensible. Of course, we didn't discover this right now in pandemic, but we knew it from before. So with this permeability that has been increased, as Marcelo was alluding to, human beings can be more permeable right now. Inside the system of art, it is important to go deeper into this issue. I mean, that was my reflection. I was kind of left thinking on this. I was dangling on this idea. Cases such as the one Maristella showed, Tomas's project, are all the contrary. But those of us who live and who move about in the world of art, we know that there's lots of many other cases on the contrary. And maybe the time has come for us to go deeper into this issue and to reconsider it. Yes, let me say that along those lines, I'd like to add the expression of Claudia Epstein or Martin Marcos, who are listening to us, and that's where they are headed for, in connection to the ways in which those of us who are responsible for triggering situations or accompanying or contributing to or giving spaces to from the space of art and culture, we should be aware and we should be working along those lines. And at the same time, well, what was expressed by Christian when he started his presentation in connection to the need to work on site with local materials, and this, which may look like something less relevant, we might look like we are talking about budgetary constraints. We are actually not. This aims at far more important things. And again, the example of Iris and Pacha work along these lines, or the one that was presented by Ian or by Christian, working on site, the score, the musical score, and the way that it gets the typical features of each place. Aerosen would have been quite different in a place where it could have flown, but where it didn't have to ask for permission in the best way or of the term to any community. Projects being opened up to dialogue, being constructed in a key of dialogue is what give it a new consideration and considering the practices that were present in place before our pandemic, we had explored with BIENALSUR, and we would like to keep encouraging things along these lines, as is the case of what Alex had been considering, those of us who are part of these presentations.
Oui, sí, sí.
May I take the floor?
Hay dos cosas que
There's two things I'd like to take into consideration.
lo que estamos hablando en este momento con un
We
cambio.
only change if we change our language.
Eso es la única cosa que marcará
That is the only thing that will show that we will have come to the other side of the bridge when we realize that language has changed, the way doing things has changed, the system in which things work has changed. This is the challenge that will give grounds to all the pain we are going through. If we come to a place where it's not just the message that changes, but obviously, and alongside the message, we change the way to relate to one another, the role of art in society. If relations change, then that's a true change. And in another order of magnitude,
hay un sentido de
there is a purpose, there is a sense behind transformation. The transformation we are going through has a very strong element to it. Art that will be produced inside the walls right now is marked by trauma, and that's the raw material of all the life that we are living through today. We all are living on the sign of trauma, and we don't know what the size of the trauma is like, but the trauma may be one of the wealthiest raw materials in art, I should say.
Cristian, estabas a punto de hablar y...
Christian?
Oui, c'est vrai que ce traumatisme est important, mais je pense
It is true. All these notions are very relevant. There has always been trauma, and art is the result of trauma. That is typically the case. But at the same time, we have to allow artists to change so that trauma is transformed by artists. And this is held within themselves. In connection to Buenos Aires, there's always been a problem
qu'il faut constamment leur
in
redonner.
connection to the memory sites. We constantly have to give them new life.
Et ce sont les noms des habitants.
There are memorial places in Paris with the names of those who inhabited those places. And in July, I asked for names not to be embossed on stone, but rather printed on paper. So what was done is to redo the memorial for the last 2 years. And that's the way of rephrasing the sentence. I think it is necessary to reinvert, to reload, to make it face reality, to work on it again, to reread the whole thing. We need to reconstruct things. This is a way to keep memory present, not to forget. It's not just the landscape. This is something that has to be done permanently. So what the director of the memorial said is very fitting. We have to highlight the names.
Et de demander à tous les gens qui acceptaient de donner du temps pour dire des noms de disparus. Et que le mémorial ne soit pas fait de
And so we are
pierre.
asking people who visit memorials, we are asking time so that they have memories of those that went missing. But memories should not be embossed in stone. Memories should be kept alive in the minds of people who are giving their time to memorize them. And if there comes a point where nobody else is willing to remember the names, this is over and done with. So memories have to be rebuilt every time. We need to rename the names time and time again. We need to read them out loud. It shouldn't be embossed on stone or on bronze for that matter. It's a matter of a perspective. That's my perspective. It's different. I believe that towards the future, we have possibilities that are not so far covered. Something will happen. Everything will turn more virtual for better or for worse. And also, it is also possible for the world of art and for museums to go back to how they were before, like brick and mortar museums. So I'm not all that sure that everything will change after this pandemic, but maybe we should dive deeper into the world of virtuality so that both things coexist. That's my own opinion. Thank you.
No se escucha, amigo. ¿No se escucha? Ahora sí, ahora sí.
Ahora sí. Bueno. Digo, Maristela hizo referencia a que no se habla.
Maristela made reference to the fact that we don't talk much about ecology in pandemic, but she will agree with me on this one. This pandemic has nothing new, unforeseen, or original, for that matter. It is just a mere consequence of the type of capitalism we are living in and the type of exploitation of the world we are living in. This is caused by those reasons. So this is one of the consequences of the type of life that we have led so far. But this leads us into a different consideration right now, because art and culture, and I believe that this is no mere chance. I mean, some of us were more focused on political activism, or those of us that have been working in academic roles are here, and this is no coincidence. The limits of political action and deconstruction of facts in the world of art and culture come together. Marcelo Dantas is taking part in the creation of the City of Creativity in Sao Paulo with an administration that is totally genocidal. But the space is not a public one, I know. But you are living in a country where, as we have discussed times before over the phone, you are trying to have a sixth world championship, not in terms of soccer, but in terms of the number of victims of coronavirus. And on the other hand, a country that is also protagonizing an action. Maybe it shouldn't be called genocidal, but it is very serious in terms of the native communities and the environment. Yes, native communities and the environment, with a deep lack of respect for Afro-descendancy that, paradoxically enough, has to do with the majority of people in Brazil. So I say that all art actions that have to, or all actions that have to do with art, depending on how they are carried forward or how they are conceived, have a deep political purpose. And for that reason, what we have said so far, quite repeatedly with Diana when we started creating and designing BIENALSUR, it is increasingly more commonsensical. Christian Boltanski is no politician, never he attempted to be one, but when he tries to create sense, and whatever he does in connection to creating memory has a deep-seated political purpose, even when that is not his purpose behind. And everything that has to do with art and culture will have a prevailing role together with ecological efforts and together with what Maristela was considering, the defense of those sectors that today are showing how inequality is even more enhanced. Inequality today is not just social and economic inequality. The social gap will be bigger as a result of this pandemic, but also the place where some people, some sectors that are represented by racial minorities or feminism and the situation of greater peril and increased crime rates on a gender type of crimes will be far more looked down on. So whatever could be in the past personified by an artist or an association or a biennale that would favor an artist who would focus on a given type of expression, making reference to political issues in their art, it may not be a need today, but maybe it becomes something that is totally objective in the rest of the world. It is objective considering the current situation of the world. Objective meaning necessary and absolutely essential. That's what I wanted to add because it was kind of unorderly, but I think that I tried to convey my ideas the best way possible. Who'd like to take the floor now? Maristela, maybe? You were alluded to several times before. Florence, sorry. I agree with Aníbal Hossamy in connection to the fact that pandemic has an origin in capitalism, but I wouldn't want us to be so generic, not so generic in the model of globalization. Since we are using the metaphor of landing on the territory, it is necessary to put on the agenda the social environmental causes of pandemic that have to do with zoonotic viruses, with the destruction of ecosystems, deforestation, and raising animals to a grand scale. And this is to land pandemic and to see what type of development models are being carried out, which actually exacerbate the possibilities for pandemic to actually exist. There is no possibility of political actions that will place this on the center to take urgent actions when it comes to that. On the contrary, we have the metaphor of war, the war metaphor that is at the core of political discourses. Landing on territories is a very happy metaphor, I should say, because I say Tomás Saraceno also went to a territory in 2017 and he came across native communities. He came across the fact that a primary, wild, sublime landscape such as the salt fields became some sort of commodity. These are the strong images he aims at giving it visibility. In Brazil, what is going on is quite concerning, and I should say that between today and tomorrow, the first Amazonic Assembly will take place, conducted in Brazil by the people that are more threatened today in that country. Yes, Alex. By picking up on a number of things that were commented on by other participants, the construction of the narrative, considering Christian and his piece. This is what people say about their work, what is interesting for them. The narrative in which Maristela is taking part of when she talks about the way in which the metaphor of war is the one that is useful in generating the common stream to the current narrative. There is a re-emergence of what was there, what we knew. What Hannibal was saying is not innovation, but we looked the other way nonetheless. So when it comes to that, intensifying the borders that moved on to our own body or to the doors to our house, the deep gaps in social justice, the reemergence of xenophobia, etc., and the need to render other potential latencies manifest that were kind of underneath, lead me into BIENALSUR and the possibility of possible futures through art and culture. And from the logic of territory, there is this issue of being deeply settled and the conscience of each society in connection to where we are placed, where we come from, and where we would like to go to. In current circumstances and in the forum like this, we do have opportunities with analog positions, which I believe this is something that opened up the door. BIENALSUR opened up the door, and this is a model of systems, not just in the artistic and cultural environment, but in the critical discussion on culture and social potential. As this type of forum can be, this will be no doubt one of the tools and the key conscience in the construction of possible futures. And I'd like to go back to what was highlighted by Marcelo, the idea of the virus as a model, as an opportunity, this conceptual hospital. We still don't have the place we'll be heading for. And this is what the purpose behind this invitation is talking about. Places to denounce analog positions. This will be one of the great virtues of potential futures or possible futures. I really like the idea of the narrative. The territory is looking for greater participation, greater equality, and more fraternity. Public space is key, but it might not be the end of capitalism or not. Apparently it is, but I'm not sure. What we do know, however, is that through a virtual tool, through local participation, we have a world decision. We saw it not that long ago in the movement against racism, the ecologic presence, the gender issue. Artists open up a window, and it's unbelievable to see that based on whatever this has been considered and based on what Woltansky said, that was a long time ago. And now it is a reality and a need, something that we won't be compromising on. Today, we will have to see this in a different way, redoing on-site pieces. And this is why artists help a lot on that, because they are conquering new territories. They might be the first ones. And I'd like to create a number of things. Art being the only one that resists to death. This is a big hope, and it's a window that is open up to art. Art, the only thing that resists to death. I hope we remain open with all of this. Helga, I was listening to you very deeply so, because during this while I was in confinement and I was thinking about how to keep going and how to go back to normality at a later stage. My uncertainty is total. I mean, we have lived this month with lots of changes, even in a matter of hours. And that has personally generated some sort of dispersion or dizziness, so to speak, that has affected us personally, and it affects us at a productive level as well. It is true that going back to normal, to the previous normal, as Maristela was saying, cannot be possible. I mean, this has become quite evident. Many of the things that had been done so far are not the ones we should continue to have, but in our rethinking of the new normal, or of the projects or the projection of our role or of our work as artists, as cultural agents, or as citizens in general is very difficult for me to think about something very specific right now. So that is on the one hand. This is why all your considerations are very interesting indeed. On the other hand, focusing on the future, but rather than this, well, focusing on the territory, this being the common thread to all narratives. Territories have been vulnerated all this while, and this generated some sort of fear, not just because of pandemic and infections and whatnot, but maybe because all of a sudden we weren't able to leave 1 kilometer away from home. We couldn't go back to work. We couldn't open up our spaces to work. We couldn't connect with people. We couldn't walk through the border. We have family and work. I live in the French Basque country, but my work is in the Spanish side. So all of a sudden I had to show my documentations, explain to the police why was it that I needed to go to the other border. Several bridges were closed. Just one was left open, and that generated lots of chaos. So at a territory level, what we say, I mean, the territory we are inhabiting, the territory we are generating, where all these narratives are generated that are part of this history that is very much present. It is quite difficult to draw a conclusion right now. I think that we should reflect on the territory at the same time. We have to reflect on what happened to us during all this while and what will continue to happen to us. It is interesting. And I believe that this will have an impact on the future projects, at least on the ones we work on, because they are very related to the territory. Some couldn't be carried out as have been carried out so far. And that generates in me this uncertainty. And I still don't know where the whole thing will get channeled on. And I don't seem to find an answer to all that. It's like I don't really know. Maybe I left you with more questions than answers. Jan, did you raise your hand? Christian. In my case, if you ask me what my country is, my answer will be art. Art from very many places around the world. And I might as well be in Buenos Aires or in Tokyo, but the territory is the world. My territory is the world.
A mí me gustaría ofrecerles la palabra.
I'd like to offer the word, the floor to those who would like to add. Otherwise, I should be closing.
Okay.
Yes,
Todos lo amamos.
que fue la inspiración de mi vida todos los días. Que casi todos los días
Every day, I think about you. I love you, Christian.
Okay.
Bueno.
Thank you so much. We all love you, Christian. And I'd like to thank you all. And at least so in closing, which is actually not a closing, my PhD thesis got called conclusions or final considerations. So I won't never be closing any dialogue on future possibilities or on possible futures. But I'd like to go back to something, this idea of a gateway, of which we discussed a while ago, and the possibility to keep thinking. And maybe the term is not to enjoy, but to be involved with not knowing where we are headed for. And from that non-place, not knowing, it's not a non-place, but a place where we don't really know, well, it's to be able to go back and think again. And it's a matter of going back to what we were saying in the beginning, being left in the world, in the foreign world, in the best term or sense of this term, rethinking, looking at everything again, walking down blindfoldedly, trying to take ownership of the language and see how we see and say things. And well, we have a space which is the one that resonates with us far better, which is the space of art, it being frail and unstable and highly mobile. And in that mobility, I believe we have many chances to take action, even to make migration officers to take a leadership role such as the one that Alex was showing us. So I'll give the floor to Aníbal or to whomever would like to make a comment before closing. If you can complete a phrase by André Malraux, being one of the most brilliant French people who have ever existed, I believe it is no chance to say that Malraux is one of the most brilliant French, because another brilliant French would be Jacques Blanc, and the two of them have been ministers of culture. And that evidently has to do with what you were saying, Diana, in the beginning, this wonderful cultural interest France has, which from our point of view and from BIENALSUR's point of view, we feel so united, so supported, and so participant of a common criterion with France. If I can complete the phrase by Monroe that art resists to death, I would say that we will keep living thanks to that art through times of creativity, because we all agree on the fact that we don't want to go back to the previous situation before the pandemic, and that role that we said before, culture can have in that path to something different in the post-pandemic will evidently have to be art that is quite connected to people. And I say art, cultural actions that have a lot to do with people participation, that can be quite massive, that can have a lot of possibility to be reproduced. And as you always are, because we are 24/7 thinking about BIENALSUR and examples about ourselves, the Battement de Cœur by Christian Boltanski that have dozens of millions of hearts in the world, or beats that are in the world in an island on Japan, or the actions that we carried out with Marcelo Dantas, Pistoletto, and hundreds of children in La Boca, creating a piece and paying tribute to Pistoletto as some sort of big political leader, or what we did with Katsuchiko Ibino, who is listening to us from Tokyo, even when he is not sleeping right now, or with the Quilmes Calchaquí in Tucumán, empowering those children through recovering the more sacred thing they had, the sacred city in Quilmes, that those people who were transplanted from Tucumán to Buenos Aires, and we took earth from Buenos Aires symbolically, so that with that earth they would work and they would be depositing their objects on their sacred land by recovering it. I believe that this is what comes next, from the world of art and culture down to a future that we would like it to be a better future. Of course, we don't want to be it better. We want it to be different. We don't want that in a few more years, if there is pandemics, it should be the fruit of a devastating capitalism or exploitation of earth, which has no sense. This is our will. Some of us believe that through BIENALSUR, we are working along those lines. So I just have to say, on behalf of Diana's behalf and on my own behalf, to thank you a lot for having participated in this. We remain open to any cooperation and collaboration, all ideas you may want to keep channeling through to us so we can keep expanding our efforts. Thank you all. And I'd like to make the last remark as a situated project, a quote by Antonio Berni: since art allows us to imagine different futures, well, with Berni, we should say that all arts are is political in nature. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good
Muchas
meeting
gracias.
all of you, and thank you.